Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to another episode of the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I'm your host, Kevin. I joined once again by Allen Strk. We are here to bring you the Falcons cornerback review today. We're going over the original faces, because as Allen just said before we start recording, a lot of familiar faces still here. The top guys more or less intact. We do have quite a competition at slot corner developing, where we'll be talking about the rookie, talking about the veteran, talking about some of the other guys that could factor in there, and talking about the depth here, because one of the positions that you need the most depth in the NFL year after year is cornerback, because they're small guys and they gotta make tackles, and you know that usually ends with guys having to miss time. So the depth crucially important in this position. Before we get started, of course, want to welcome back to the show Allen Strk. He's at Allen Strk on Twitter and also over on Blue Sky. Allen, welcome back. How are you doing today, my friend?
Thank you. Doing great. And you mentioned when it comes to cornerback depth, and I know people like to not remember this game for obvious reasons, but if you remember the Broncos game where they got obliterated, I feel like they had three healthy cornerbacks at one point in that game. So you absolutely need the depth, especially competing in the NFC. I know, look, the NFC South is the land of opportunity, but still, as you see with these teams building their depth at wide receiver position, you got to be ready at corner. So even though there's a lot of familiarity, there's also plenty of players here that have a lot to prove.
Yeah, absolutely. And is this an Australia jersey? Because
well said. Yeah.
Yeah, I did not like, I never have seen the logo like that close. I didn't realize it was like, I thought there was some animals there, but it's like a kangaroo and an ostrich. That's
peak. Pretty evidence Australia.
Yeah, that is peak animal placement there for Australia. I mean, if you've got kangaroos and ostriches just running around, I mean, I feel like you kind of have to put them on the logo. So respect to Australia there. But
yeah, everyone knows me for being Croatian. My mom was actually born in Melbourne, Australia, so I do have a soft spot for Australia. I try to represent when I can.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, with a jersey like that fresh, I mean, I don't blame you. That's you got to wear that at every opportunity. Yeah. But yes, we are here to talk about American football today. Not, there may be time this summer. I mean, we still got several weeks to talk about, European football. But today, cornerback, we're going to get to that real quick before we start, guys. I want to bring you a quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline. Folks, BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your sports betting action. Baseball in full swing. We're not going to talk about the Braves. We're just going to leave that, where it is. But BetOnline's got more ways than ever to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, and even live in-game betting options while the games are being played. Obviously, we've got MLB, but there's also UFC going strong right now. Tennis is kicking off. NFL futures are in full swing. If you want to bet on team over-unders, if you want to bet on Super Bowl odds, division winning odds, conference odds, defensive and offensive rookie of the year, all that stuff. This is the time where you can get those kind of crazy early season odds before guys break out. Now, obviously that requires the most speculation, right? But if you think like, oh yeah, Jalen Walker is going to be the guy, the defensive rookie of the year, and you feel confident in that, you can do it and you get great odds on it right now. So you can head on over to betonline.ag to take advantage of the latest promotions with our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. And you can join up with their new industry-leading VIP loyalty program. They've got level up bonuses. They've got weekly cash boosts. They've got all that fun stuff. What are you waiting for, folks? BetOnline. The game starts here. All right, Allen, let's get started here we'll start with the guy that has been kind of the stalwart. And I remember this kind of kicked off it might not have, I think it technically was kicked off with Chris Lindstrom, but like the sort of run, maybe it was even Keanu Neal. This has been a thing for a while, where the Falcons always like draft the guy that I have them taking in the second round in like an early mock draft in the first round, and people being like, wow, they overpaid for this guy, but they actually didn't. And I think in every one of these situations, it's generally turned out to be great. AJ Terrell, another great example of that.
Yeah, I got a quick question when it comes to the first round, because obviously you have Keanu Neal, Takk McKinley, Chris Lindstrom. Did you consider Calvin Ridley a first-round pick?
Yes, I did consider him a first-round pick, but I didn't think they were going to take a receiver. I think I was like way off on that. I was like, oh yeah, they don't need to take a receiver. They won't do it. And then they end up, of course, doing it. But yeah, I think Lindstrom was obviously one. Keanu Neal was one. AJ Terrell, and I think who was
Takk
it?
McKinley and Caleb McGarry.
Yeah,
Caleb McGarry might be their third round.
Yeah, I think that is correct. And then Takk, I didn't watch Takk that year. I think Eric did, and so Eric was actually familiar with him and was pretty interested in his developmental profile. But yeah, I mean, other than maybe Tack, depending on where you had him ranked, I think the Falcons have actually done pretty well with these sort of guys that are maybe like, originally considered second rounders that kind of rise up the board over the course of the offseason. And Terrell was a great example of that. Ends up going 15. I think a lot of people thought that was early, but I think he's definitely erased any questions about whether he was worthy of that top 20 selection.
Was it because the national title game?
Yeah.
I think that got a lot of negative attention, but just like one game.
It's Jamar Chase.
Yeah, that too. I just think at the time it was 2020. People just had to get takes off because also this whole CD Lamb, not situation, but the fact that we're never going to take CD Lamb in that spot. But nevertheless, I think Terrell's actually coming off his best year since, to me, 2021. He truly had his elite year. Like, that season was very forgettable, but I just remember, like, if you threw AJ Terrell's way, it was kind of like Desmond Trufant, like 2014, 2015. More likely than not, it's going to be an incomplete pass, bad pass, occasional interception. Like, he was such a lockdown player a year. And in 2022, he just had rough moments. Like, I think just the big plays always shine with him when he does allow a big play, just because, they make a lot of sense. I mean, like, his coverage is tight. Like, for instance, he'll have tight coverage on, like, a Cooper Kupp or a Michael Thomas. I remember in 2022. But for whatever reason, the throw was just pinpoint accurate, and he just didn't get his hand in there fast enough. But more times than not, especially I think last year, not a lot of big plays allowed. Pretty consistent tackling-wise outside the Washington game. That game was a disaster for everybody. But I just thought consistency-wise, you saw him get near that 2021 peak. I don't know if he could ever get there again, but the big plays that kind of affected his reputation, like you see him against like a Mike Evans or DJ Moore in particular. I remember they got him in 2023. I feel like those big plays were kind of limited, and you saw Terrell as best because we know he can cover. It's just a matter of not getting those costly penalties and just making sure that those contested catches aren't completed.
Yeah, and I think with Terrell, it's like we've seen just a lot of zone defense played in Atlanta, and like that's not just an Atlanta thing. Like the NFL as a whole has become more zone heavy because of the running quarterbacks and other things like that. But like I think Terrell just really thrives in man, and I think he's just great at it. And I think what we've seen, like last year, that the team did allow him to play some sort of man match concepts on one side of the field while the rest of the team was playing zone to let him match up in some ways. And I think he thrives there. And, that's the thing with Terrell's coverage is he's really sticky, but he's going to take some aggressive risks to try to prevent plays from being completed. But that can lead to big plays too. It's just kind of the nature of the position is that, there is some guessing involved, and sometimes you're going to guess wrong, or you're going to get beat by a great receiver. Like you were talking about Mike Evans, Jamar Chase, these guys, like they're going to beat the best corners in the NFL from time to time. And it's really just a question of like, how consistent are you at limiting those moments? And I think last year was one of those great years, like you mentioned, where he really did limit those moments and had some really exceptional games over the course of the season against some top talent. So I think he gives the Falcons a really, really solid and reliable corner one to kind of build this whole secondary around.
I think he really saw his value in the darkest of times. Like that Vikings game, like Sam Darnold threw 5 touchdowns. I think Terrell allowed maybe one catch the whole game, and Kevin O'Connell made a priority to get Justin Jefferson away from. For a reason, Raheem Morris didn't really allow Terrell to shadow Jefferson in that game, even though I think later in the year you saw Terrell shadow, like Terry McLaurin, for instance. I remember he shadowed him in that Sunday night game. But I just remember that Vikings game, like they were just like, get Jefferson away from Terrell. We're going to exploit these mismatches. And for every big play was allowed, you did not see AJ Terrell in the vicinity of any of them. So it just goes to show you that because the Falcons aren't played heavy man that game. And Terrell was like, okay, you're watching all 22. Terrell was more than holding his own, and then everywhere else was just like, it's not handle.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's a stalwart, and I think last year we really saw him get back to his best. I thought 2022 was kind of rough, and then 2023 was good, but the lows are pretty low with Mike Evans and DJ Moore.
Yeah, and some of that is matchups too. Like I feel like Mike Evans has always given Terrell trouble just because Terrell wants to play him like physical and up front, but like Mike Evans is one of those receivers you can't really out physical. Like it's you kind of have to I think the Falcons had so much confidence in Terrell, they were like, we'll just let him guard him. And it's like, you probably need safety help for Mike Evans. Like most people do. You got to like jam him and sort of pincer him and things like that to make sure he can't get deep on you. But Terrell does is I think people below Terrell's play against guys like Mike Evans because it's like, look at what Mike Evans does to everybody. Like this is not like a Terrell problem. This is just that's how he works. So,
and credit to Terrell, he had one of his to me, the best interception of his career against Tampa Bay in that big win on the road. He read Baker Mayfield's eyes really well and picked up that pass. Terrell and Bates had crazy picks in that game. That was probably, of all the games last year, in terms of this like entertainment value, Falcons had some really good games, but that Bucs game on the road, well, I mean, the Bucs game at home was legendary too, but at least the Bucs game on the road, they played some respectable defense.
Yeah, mildly respectable. Yeah, well, hopefully we can get back to that this year. But, opposite Terrell, it appears that the team is giving that, Mike Hughes is back. They did make the decision to re-sign him. He's back at $6 million a year for 3 years, which is really like quite a long deal. And I think Hughes, like at $6 million, is kind of a bargain given what we saw last year, where you're looking at like a high-end corner too, and those guys a lot of times can make more than 10 million plus, and we're seeing the cornerback market continue to skyrocket. So Atlanta has a guy in Hughes who they say they love his inside-outside versatility, and yes, he can play the slot. I've never really loved him as a slot corner. I think that his best fit has always been outside, but he does have plenty of experience there, and he can play it. But I think he's best outside, and I think that's where he's going to play this year for Atlanta. But how do you feel with Hughes coming back? Obviously, it'll be a little bit of a different defense once again. And, strangely enough, I think Hughes is one of those guys that's probably better in man coverage. But, Ulbrich probably going to play some hybrid stuff. We've seen them play a lot of cover 3 to let these guys be a little bit more physical at the line of scrimmage in some situations. But how do you feel about Mike Hughes at corner 2 going into the season?
That's the big overall question, just in terms of scheme change. Because the Jets played, I think, top 5 most man last year, but look at the personnel. They had Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. Like, you have those corners that will be playing plenty of man. Well, we know with Jimmy Lake's rather bland scheme how much the Falcons did not play bad. So I'm interested to see how that correlates. And I think it's like, if you want to look at Ulbrich back when he was with the Falcons, majority of that time was with Dan Quinn. So we know Dan Quinn always wanted to play cover 3. So it's hard to find like a true clarifying question of just how much they're going to play man compared to zone, but I assume they're definitely going to mix up their coverages. And I just think Mike Hughes, his awareness and his terrific tackling ability, like I think you see more and more coaches that emphasize tackling when it comes to the DBs. And I think it was the Saints game at home. He had like 2 or 3 massive hits, and I'm just like, okay. I think that was the moment where fans were just like, all right, I think we got to start accepting him, because like early on it was like, all right, good start. But then it was just that Saints game. You just saw a couple of big hits. And other than that Vikings game, like, and that's the game everyone got beat except Terrell, like, Hughes didn't really allow a lot of big plays. He was just always in the right position, made some good plays on ball, never really got penalized either. He was just disciplined and compact. So it's just like, he's definitely one of the more pleasant surprises. It's just, I wonder how much pressure can they put on him when it comes to playing more man. Because yes, he could do it, but it seemed like he was a little more comfortable playing zone. So, and also how they're going to, because there were times last year like Clark Phillips would spell him. I'm interested to see, is it going to be an open train camp battle, or is Hughes just going to be the definitive star of that?
Yeah, I certainly, think it's a good idea to continue getting Phillips reps and to like see if he can overtake Hughes. But given that they paid Hughes, they say it's, that they're happy with him being, someone who could play inside, outside, and that makes him a valuable depth piece, even if he's not starting. But at $6 million a year, he's probably should be starting, right? So, I kind of don't expect Phillips to overtake him, but Phillips is a guy we'll talk about real soon, because it's really good to have depth that you can rely on to not be a problem. And I think Phillips' per snap numbers last year were actually really good, and gives you, some hope that he can turn into the guy that I think a lot of people thought that he was going to become eventually in Atlanta, despite his sort of fall on draft day. But before we get to that, we should probably talk about the slot corner spot, which is definitely the most open position maybe on the entire defense at this point. In that, Dee Alford is back, and he played the position last year, but it was not good enough. We know that. And part of that was absolutely Jimmy Lake. And Dee Alford, I think, is another guy that if you let him play man, he's typically more comfortable. But we don't know how much man is going to be played this year, like you said. And the Falcons also brought in plenty of competition in terms of rookie Billy Bowman Jr., who's converting to slot corner from safety, and also Natrone Brooks, who I think looked like the Falcons' best slot corner last year when he was on the field. So, I don't think anyone's really talking about Natrone Brooks, but I think he is a guy that fans should be keeping an eye on in training camp as sort of a dark horse for the position, because I think Brooks is good. I think every time he's played, he's been very solid. So what do you think about this slot position? Do you have sort of an expectation at this point of who could win the job?
I'm so happy you mentioned Brooks because once again to bring up the Broncos game, like Brooks played extended snaps there, and I know most people tuned out of that game, but he had about 2 really good pass breakups where he just broke on the ball really smoothly. He's got smooth hips, just very fluid. And I think he had some moments against, I believe, the Giants and maybe it was the Cowboys. Like he only played about 50 snaps last year, and it just I know they had so much depth there because they were also insistent on playing Kevin King and dime, which actually worked out well. Kevin King had his moments, like he wasn't a total liability. So I'm curious to see if Brooks gets more reps because he definitely like he has the intangibles where it's like, okay, maybe he can do it. Just there's no way Dee Alford could be just a definitive starter. And it's not just because of the zone coverage breakdowns, but I thought a lot of his issues sometimes just came from a communication standpoint. Like when teams are running shallow crosses or all sorts of different cross routes, it just seems like he was constantly a step or two behind. So I like to think maybe experience, but he's been in the league a decent amount of time. Remember, 2023, I know Arthur Smith benched him for some unspecified reason. I remember we would go on some rants about that. But you just think with all the experience he's gained now, like you should be having this many communication issues. And I think that was a big problem with this game. So between him, Bowman, and Brooks, I'm interested to see who really emerges because I don't think Kevin King is fast enough to play slot. I think he's just pure dime at his point. So I think it will come out to Alford, Bowman, and Brooks.
Yeah, I agree. I think King is probably more of like a safety, like big nickel player at this point, which, like you said, I think that's actually a decent role for him, given his size and sort of long speed constraints. But yeah, Billy Bowman, I imagine they're going to give him every opportunity to win, and I imagine that Trone Brooks will be involved as well. But yeah, Dee Alford probably has to like really show, and it could be like that. We'll probably never know the extent of Jimmy Lake's like defensive issues because the team is way too classy to throw him under the bus. They won't do that. And I don't think, I don't think any of the players will either because it's just not something that you do. But I think there were obvious issues with the scheme, with communication, with the rules. And I know Alford mentioned this on Twitter as well, like just kind of vaguely talking about it. And I still hope we'll get him on the show at some point. But, some of that, if it was mostly Lake issues, the previous season, Alford did look quite good. So I think if he wins an open competition, then I know some people will be like really upset with that, but I think if he wins a competition against a really talented rookie and a guy in Trone Brooks who we know is solid, we should feel better about that. I don't think he's going to get handed any job or anything like that. So, the competition's good, and obviously we'll have Bowman in the mix, and he's a guy that played a lot of slot while playing safety at Oklahoma, and I'm really excited to see how quickly he can get up to speed. But, I know people have sort of penciled him into the starting job, and I think that might be a little unreasonable going from a guy that played a lot of safety and a good number of slot snaps, don't get me wrong, in college to like NFL slot starter in like one training camp. Like it might be more of a runway to him starting than that. But we've seen guys like really come on the scene quick and hit the ground running. He certainly could be one of those guys as well.
So how high of expectations, not just year one, but in general, like say within 3 years, like how much do you think Bowman could develop? Do you think he'd become a legitimate starter?
Yeah, I think I would bet on Bowman starting next year. I think that's a bet that I would take. I think he just needs to sort of develop like a little bit more discipline, because right now he's like a bat out of hell, and that actually works okay. Like I think that works a lot better as a slot player than like a deep safety, where you're taking way too many risks at deep safety. Yeah. That causes problems at times. In the slot, you can be a little bit more aggressive and risky with it, especially when you're playing close to the line of scrimmage, like in run defense and whatever. Because like if you end up missing a tackle in the backfield, that's not usually going to result in like a big problem for your defense. Like, it might not be a tackle for loss like it would have been a great play. Maybe like if you could just slow down the guy, like he usually like made contact or at least slowed guys down in college, and then but if you like fail to make the tackle from a deep safety alignment, then it's a touchdown. If you fail to make the tackle in the backfield, hopefully that's still like a minimal gain, so we'll see. But I think it's just a matter of like how quickly you can get up to speed. And this defense, that's one of the things I think you can always laud the Quinn style defenses for, is that frequently everyone's played in the defense because it's so popular, but it's also very simple. Like it's not overly complicated. It's certainly not a Fangio back end where there's a ton of rules and ton of, sort of interlocking and like matched coverages that are quite complicated. And guys have talked about this, like the Fangio scheme, it takes time, especially when it's being implemented the first time. We saw that last year, certainly. The Quinn scheme is much simpler. That also makes it theoretically like easier to figure out and beat, but it also means that the players don't have to spend as much time thinking. They can spend much more time just playing and reacting. So that could open the door for someone like Bowman to get on the field earlier if the scheme is a little bit less complicated.
Also remember when Dee Peace was talking about how Richie Grant couldn't see the field much the first 2 months when he was there back in 2021. He talked about the complexities of his scheme, and I know some people, a couple eyebrows raised when it comes to Team Peace talking about Richie Grant because we know how Richie Grant ended up, but it's just an example I'm using right now.
Yeah.
Last thing on Bowman, are you a little worried about his physical limitations? Because similar to Clark Phillips, he's just undersized.
Yeah, I think Bowman's, the same height. I think he's a little bit bigger than Phillips. I think he's like 5'10" and Phillips is like 5'9", or something like that. But Bowman's like thick. And I think that is going to make a big difference. Like one of the other things with Phillips was that he was like in the like low 180s, and I think Bowman's in the 190s and has even played at 200 at times. And like if he can play at that weight, like mid 190s, close to 200, that's going to eliminate, I think, a lot of the issues that we saw with Clark Phillips in the slot, which is that he can't really take on like tackles to the same. Like Clark Phillips is a very sound tackler. Like he knows where he's supposed to be. He does what he's supposed to do. But if you're like playing at 180 and you're going up against a 220-pound running back, you're just not going to make the stop unless you can ankle bite. And like he's good at doing that and at least slowing him down. But you get a slot corner like Bowman, who also just like, again, kind of a bad out of hell physical player. He can take down that guy. He can stop him in his tracks, and I think that will lead to him having a lot more success in the slot as opposed to someone like Phillips, who's both undersized in terms of weight and height. So I do think he's better suited to it than Phillips was, and that's why I still think that Phillips is just better outside. You don't have to deal with as much trash in the middle of the field. So,
and even though teams do use like those power slots, you're still more likely than not going to get a smaller wide receiver in the slot than a big slot. So that helps because, as we've seen with Clark Phillips at times, those contested catches can be a bit tricky. I remember in the Saints game, there were a couple of plays against Valdez Scantling you kind of wish he could have made, but look, the size limitations could be frustrating. We love Brent Grimes, but Brent Grimes could only do so much. But at least with players like Bowman and Phillips, they possess tremendous ball skills. Like if you watch Bowman's tape, I think he had 11 career interceptions there, 3 pick sixes. That's unbelievable. And we saw Clark Phillips against the Panthers this year have a really nice pick six that I still have no idea why he did not go into the end zone, but coaches be disciplined players. I don't know. When you get that moment, get the moment.
Get in there. You might not get another chance. Get in the end zone.
The Panthers at the time. I know the Panthers are ended up being respectable, but at that time, the Panthers are the biggest laughing stock in the sport.
Yeah, go get your touchdown, buddy. It's okay. But yeah, moving on to the rest of the depth chart, like Billy Bowman, I think was like second in interceptions. I think like Xavier Watts was first, and then the other guy they picked up on the depth chart lower down, Kobe Bryant, the UDFA, I think was third. So the Falcons, I think, ended up getting like just like the top 3 interception getters over the last 2 seasons in college football. So, but that kind of brings us to the next topic, which is how does this depth chart shake out? Because obviously at slot, we talked about 3 guys, probably 2 of them will make the roster as like your main slot guys. And they also have the backstop of Mike Hughes, who's like can play the slot. So that's kind of their extra slot depth. So, we talked about Clark Phillips. He's probably the favorite to be like sort of the main outside depth guy. They brought in Mike Ford Jr., more of a special teamer, but we know they really do appreciate those special teamers. And, we talked about it, like UDFA Kobe Bryant has a lot of hype. I know Raheem mentioned like he's maybe the most famous UDFA that they've ever had, as Kim was asking about him. They brought in Keith Taylor, who's a special teamer from the Chiefs. They brought in the other Lamar Jackson, which I feel like that you just have to have him just for the lulz. But and Dante Manning, who I'm not super familiar with, but he's also here to compete. So, among these depth guys, they're probably going to keep, we mentioned they're probably going to keep 2 slot guys plus Mike Hughes and AJ Terrell. So that's already 4 guys to divvy up, so maybe 2 more slots. Like usually teams keep 6 corners. So, Clark Phillips, you have to think is 1, but that's a lot of competition now for that final spot on this roster.
And you have to play special teams in that type of role. So especially, I think Ford has an advantage there. I remember Brooks playing special teams and even Kevin King. So at least they possess that ability. But based on the expectations, more like just genuine hype. Like Bryant's an intriguing player. Like if Bryant, he's gonna have opportunities in preseason because as we know, the Falcons don't really play starters. So just the fact that he's gonna get extra reps, you make a couple of plays, you make it hard for the coaching staff. I think that's the mindset you got to have as a UDFA. Just like make yourself undeniable, and just based on his tape, just like okay, he might be one of those players that could do it. But then again, you still have to show some ability to play special teams. We know how much coaches has valued that. So, Ford, King, Brooks, Bryant. I think those are the 4 you look at there. Just who could earn that role? Because even though we like Brooks, I don't think it's a guarantee he makes the roster. And even though King kind of fits as that dime corner, King was out of the league for a bit of time for reasons. So I don't think he should be guaranteed a roster. And just because Ford played with the team before doesn't mean he should be guaranteed either. So I think this is real competition, but over time, the preseason is going to determine it. I think when it comes to preseason, I think the 2 positions I always like to look at is offensive line and corners, because I think those are kind of like the more make or break positions.
Yeah. And I'm interested to see like how, because Bryant, he's someone that's going to have a hard time possibly making it to the practice squad given the hype around him. But he went undrafted, so maybe teams are more scared off by sort of his attitude than people thought. But yeah, I think the odds-on favorite for that sort of last spot, probably Bryant, but Keith Taylor's also a good special teamer. We know Mike Ford is one of the better special teamers in the NFL. And I would also have a hard time keeping Natrone Brooks off my roster if Dee Alford ends up making it as the backup slot, because Brooks just is good, and he also played a lot of special teams for the Falcons last year. So it is a tough room to figure out, and I think that will be one of the more interesting things, obviously, in preseason, is these guys are going to get a lot of run. Who sort of impresses the team enough to stick around, and who's going to be on the practice squad. And you mentioned Kevin King as well. I'm wondering if he'll factor more into like the safety room or the corner room, or if they kind of just will find a spot for him. But he seems like the ideal like practice squad guy to me, in that I don't think other teams are really going to come calling for him. No offense, of course, to Kevin King, but he's someone that is an obvious practice squad elevation if they do have injury issues, and can play, a little corner, a little safety. And the safety rooms may be a little less crowded at the moment, but I think you've got 4 safeties that you're expected to make the roster right now too. So not an easy path, certainly for him either.
Yeah, that Jordan Fuller signing really limits the options, because he's going to be there, given that he has the connections with Raheem Morris. But I think just going through each, the entire depth chart, would you agree it kind of makes you understand why they didn't pursue a Jerry Alexander or Jalen Ramsey? And look, maybe they did, but maybe they want to go overboard in pursuing them.
Yeah, I think Jair, like, it would have been more like he's willing to come here on like a 1-year prove it deal, and we just really like the player, so we'll take a chance at upgrading Mike Hughes, basically. But give it, I don't think the Falcons are going to get a lot of bites on that, because they're not a contender at the moment, and maybe after this year they will be. We saw how quickly things can change, right? Washington became that overnight, essentially. But you're not going to be able to beat the Ravens or these other teams to sign these guys to these prove-it deals, because the Falcons haven't demonstrated that they're competitive, and these guys want to sign with those guys. So I think it's very possible the Falcons reached out to Alexander and Jalen Ramsey, but it's like these guys want to go play for contending teams, or teams at least that they think that will contend. Whether the Steelers will be contending with Aaron Rodgers or not is an open question, but the defense should at least keep them in a winning record sort of level. So, we'll see. Yeah,
we know the Mike Tomlin leverage. Mike Tomlin's the ultimate players coach, so you kind of get that there. But and look, Alexander has a very checkered injury history, so I could see why the coach staff be a little bit skeptical of it. But I know his name was kind of mentioned a bit, but then again, a lot of high-priced free agents on the defensive side of the ball get mentioned. But based on Judon and Simmons last year, maybe the coach starts realizing we can't, as good as these former Pro Bowlers may look on paper, are we really going to take another chance on them? Because it was pretty much evident from the beginning that the tape definitely didn't match the name power.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like a guy like Simmons, Simmons is definitely a better signing than Judon, because you didn't have to trade for him, obviously. But like, I would be fine with Simmons coming back as like a backstop guy, as like a third safety, and I think he was still good enough to be a starter, but he wasn't like what we were hoping for, which is like Pro Bowl Justin Simmons, playing alongside Jesse Bates.
The missed tackles got very problematic eventually too, and it's just that adds up, especially in that type of defense where they're playing heavy zone.
Yeah, so that I think that's kind of the case, and I think a lot of it is also that like until the team figures out what they're going to do with Kirk Cousins, like if they keep him, they can't really afford to do much else right now. If they can trade him, that's going to open up potentially a lot of money, and they could either choose to pay that money to sort of facilitate a trade for a better pick, which I wouldn't be shocked if they go that route, especially considering they traded away their first next year. So if they pay most of Kirk's salary in exchange for like a day 2 pick, I think that would make a lot of sense. But I think until like they figure out what's going on with Kirk, whether they're keeping him or trading him for savings or trading him for not savings, they're kind of like going to just have to hold on to their money and not go too overboard, because they'll need some emergency cash and all this. But, I certainly think they have the flexibility to continue to make signings, and we'll see if it's an expensive signing or more depth stuff. And we usually see some tinkering during training camp as well. Tight end's a spot where I think we could see that for sure. If these guys that they brought in aren't really cutting it, but yeah, I corner is definitely one to monitor. But I think it feels like they're probably pretty happy with like the depth chart, and we're talking about like the depth, like they like their 2 starters on the outside. There's a competition for slot. They have a rookie they like. They have some guys that have been here for a couple years. And then the depth spots are actually pretty contested. So I think they like that depth chart. And, if there's obviously someone that comes available that's like a clear upgrade, or I wouldn't rule out like if the slot guys are not, like Billy Bowman's not ready, Dee Alford is not taking the next step, and they just don't really trust Natrone Brooks like that. Like Mike Hilton's still out there, I think. So I could see them like bringing in Mike Hilton like towards the end of training camp, to give them just like a veteran backstop there, someone that they know they can trust, and just spend some of their money there to solidify that spot. I think it's clear that the corner room and the safety room are like really important to this team, both Raheem Morris, Jerry Gray, and Jeff Ulbrich. And that they want the secondary to be the backbone. They're gonna take some risks and throw a lot of young guys on the defensive line that can pan out one way or the other. But I think they know they need the secondary to be very, very strong in order to allow them to kind of do some of this stuff up front. And I think so far, like I feel pretty good about where the secondary is. Things change quick in the secondary. It's one of the more volatile position groups, especially corner. But given the safeties, which we'll probably talk about soon, I think they have to feel pretty good about where this room is, and I certainly do. So yeah, maybe a slot veteran if they don't love how that competition's going, but otherwise I think they're probably just going to stand pat and see how this shakes out.
I do hope this is one of the positions where we actually see, besides AJ Terrell, but like most of them play in the preseason, because we know Falcons don't play stars in preseason. A lot of backups mostly get the snaps, but I feel like this is one position you want to see them get tested, just to get us more clarity. So hopefully they make that happen, because it's just, there's a lot of names there, and yeah, they have experience, but I feel like what other way you can improve themselves? I know they're having joint practices with Titans, so that could probably play into decision making, but you still want to see these guys in action, because I just thought the defense at times early in the season, they just look disorganized. And look, we all know coaching step-wise how much of an upgrade it's going to be. Certainly can't get worse, but you hope with Ulbricht's experience, especially with the Jets, because I know the Jets defense kind of fell off a cliff last year, but while he was there, though, I thought their secondary was one of the best in the league, and he really did elevate them. So I'm encouraged there, and yeah, I can't wait to see how they mix up these covers, because like we literally got nothing until about December last year. Like it was a pretty rough watch. When you watched all 22, it couldn't have been more vanilla.
Yeah, it was not good. It was like this weirdly vanilla and incredibly complicated second like scheme. Is like this is not good either way. Like this is just, it was not a good situation. So Ulbrich, we know, is gonna he's got a lot of options, and I am curious, like if Raheem's like, you've had to run Salah's defense, you've had to run Quinn's defense, you've had to do this and that. Like, why don't you just run your defense, whatever that is? Let's do it. And I think the idea that you raised, that it could be like sort of a like very mixed coverage scheme. Maybe they'll play more matchups, that sort of thing. I think that's kind of the way the best defenses are going. You know, Mike McDonald's a great example. Like, he'll play zone against running quarterbacks, but if your quarterback can't move, he's going to throw a lot of man coverage at you and make it really, really complicated and difficult to decipher and kind of mixing it up. So I hope we do see that, and that Ulbrich can kind of carve out an identity for himself. Because I don't think Raheem is going to like force anything on him. I think that's pretty clear that he only started kind of forcing things when it was going completely off the rails in the middle of the season. So what that scheme looks like, maybe we'll get some clues in training camp preseason, but more than likely we're going to be kind of waiting around until the first few weeks of the season to see how this actually looks. So,
and it's beneficial. Look, they have a really long relationship. I will say I don't think we should take anything out of what they did in 2020. I just think that season they were pretty much in survival mode, and they're just like, because I remember that season they were blitzing so much. Like, Ford Lucan had at least 5 sacks, and like I think that was like the best of the end of Deion Jones. So, but then again, yeah, like rookie AJ Terrell, like their roster was just so flawed and fragmented. So that's why, like, I really don't want to watch 2020 tape because that team was just abysmal. But I just don't think you could take much out of it. So I think at this point, if you want to watch some of what the Jets did last year, well, that'll be a pretty rough watch as well. Besides that, I just think you got to wait and see what Morris and Open cook up, just because, of course we want to educate ourselves, but sometimes it's just so much uncertainty, and just like, and I think Ulbrich, look, let's face it, he definitely has a lot to prove because he knows how ugly that stint with the Jets ended, and he's better than that. So I'm excited to see the type of urgency to coach with, because Raheem Morris is going to be coached with urgency too. Like that, I don't know if you remember that press conference after the Panthers game, like, they pretty much asked him what he liked about the defense. He said, Jesse Bates, AJ Terrell, and Cade Ellis is a weapon. Besides that, he didn't say anything. So he knows like how bad that defense was last year. And he was right. They're old, they're slow, they lacked ideas. So I'm excited to see 2 coaches really come out here with a lot of urgency with a roster that's ready to win now.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure on this group in particular and the safety room to kind of hold this young like front 7 together basically. And I think they've got the pieces to be able to do it. So let's, and hopefully the coaching staff to put them in the right position as well. So,
and force turnovers.
Yes. I think that's key.
Yeah. And look, and with a better pass rush, you know, it goes better pass rush creates more, hopefully, turnover opportunities. So, because there was multiple stretches last year where they were just struggling. Like, I think the Panthers kind of bailed them out, and Baker as well, but they were like 4 game stretches last year where they just didn't get their hands on any ball. So it was just like, what's going on? Like that, even against the Saints, it was getting frustrating. So with the addition of playmakers, particularly within the draft class, and hopefully a better pass rush, we'll see it, because I think AJ Terrell's dropsies are gone. I thought he made a couple of nice interceptions last year, because remember the jokes, I think back in 2021 it was like that. I think Terrell's capable of picking some passes off. So now it's just a matter of, you know, who's going to emerge from this cornerback room. They
definitely filled this secondary with ball hawks everywhere. Like, it was a clear point of emphasis. So I'm excited to see hopefully that bear fruit this year and get the ball back to this offense, which should hopefully, you know, be set up to take advantage of that and keep this defense from getting in too much trouble. But yeah, guys, that's the cornerback room here in Atlanta. I think it's an exciting group. I think the top 2 guys are very in good position, and then we'll see how the slot shakes out. But secondary as a whole hopefully should be a strength of this team. So thanks for watching us here. If you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe. Really appreciate that. If you're listening to your podcast platform of choice, leave us a 5-star review there. It really helps the show out, helps the show grow. Appreciate that a ton. We are gearing up for training camp coverage. Training camp's going to start in about 3 weeks, so excited to get to that. Definitely tune into live on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll have lots of updates for you there as well. We'll be back with more roster review series stuff over the coming weeks as we gear up for training camp previews and the like. But until next time, I want to thank, of course, Allen Strk at Allen Strk for coming on and helping out with this review. I'm Kevin, I have Falcoholic Kevin. Thanks again to BetOnline for sponsoring today's episode. We will see you guys next time on the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. Have a great day, folks. Thanks for joining us.